All right. We're going to pick up where we left off. That's not it. Let's try again. There we go. All right. New waves of immigration in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This is often referred to as the third great wave of immigration to the U.S. New and increasing immigration in the United States has taken place from many diverse countries, especially from Asia, Latin America, and India. So we have people in Asia coming over from kind of all over, notably South Vietnam, after the North Vietnamese take control of South Vietnam and Saigon, also Korea, Taiwan, China, the Philippines, Latin America. In the second great wave, most of the Latin American immigrants were coming from Mexico. This wave is going to be a whole new diverse group coming from Central and South America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Panama, as far into South America as Argentina, Colombia. The list just goes on and on. Why are they coming? Political freedom and economic opportunity, just like all other immigrant groups, same motives. But, guys, there's more emphasis in this era on bilingual education and English as a second language. Hang here with me. Thank you. Effects on public policy, we already learned about in the end of the Cold War, improved relations with Cuba as of 2008. Politics, voting, political unrest in Latin American countries throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Immigrants will contribute to every segment of American society: education, science, medicine, architecture, construction, cuisine, music, culture, and the arts. We always need to remember education is the key commodity in the U.S. Families want to have their children educated in America. Immigrants often want to come here for higher education because of the opportunities we provide in both the private and public sector. And those opportunities have become more and more robust as a result of the Civil Rights Acts that were passed in the 1960s, heading into the 70s and 80s. Questions up to this point? Okay. So the American space race continues from the 60s into the 70s. In the early 1960s, John F. Kennedy pledged increased support for the American space program. It was continued by Lyndon B. Johnson. So, for example, what is the space station or the space center in Cape Canaveral called in Florida? Kennedy Space Center. What is Mission Control in Houston named? Johnson. Very good. The Johnson Space Center. So, a real pivotal moment for the space race. The race to the moon continued through the 60s, even though Kennedy doesn't see it. U.S. astronaut John Glenn, first American to orbit the Earth. That was the Mercury Atlas 6 mission. But the real pivotal moment in the space race for the U.S. comes in 1969 in July. American astronaut Neil Armstrong here, first person to step on the moon's surface. You can claim that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That's the Apollo 11 mission. NASA in the space race helped improve technology and media by satellite technology. We also have better access to communication and information, most especially in rural areas. businesses, schools and colleges, as well as for individual consumers. Now we have global information at all times, different viewpoints, thanks to improved technology, the internet. For example, I'm going to have a volunteer out there. Do I have one volunteer? Awesome. Do me a favor. I know the answer to the song, but I forget the artist. All right. I would like for you to look this up without them seeing it, because I'm going to ask in a little while. Who is the artist that had the first video on MTV? So you're going to look up the artist. You'll know the answer, and then I'm going to see if somebody else can answer this. All right.
What was the question?
Good. I want you all to forget this question. I'm going to ask it. It's a little pop culture trivia that we're going to get to in a little bit. Did you figure it out?
Yeah.
Beautiful. How quick was that, right? That's information in our hands, right? Where are my Hidden Figures fans at? Any Hidden Figures fans? If you haven't seen Hidden Figures, check it out. Do I have any Apollo 13 fans? Hey, if you haven't seen Apollo 13, check it out. Well worth your time. Changes in technology and education. Technological advancements in the last 50 years have dramatically improved our communication and made information more accessible. Technology has affected life in America in many significant areas, but the most is education, right? What we're doing right now, what you have in front of you, all the resources that you have, whether they're on your desk or in your pockets. The space race is going to help with, and technology will be able to help with medical breakthroughs. We talked about Jonas Salk's development of vaccine for polio. This also leads to technological advancements. Cable TV news, 24-hour news, introduced in 1980 by Ted Turner, CNN, based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Personal computers, PCs, Mac or PC, where are my Mac people at? Mac people, where are my PC people at? Same. All right. Cell phones, calling and texting, World Wide Web. The reason that I put Facebook, eBay, and Amazon up here as examples is because Facebook revolutionizes social networking. eBay revolutionizes second-hand consumers and buyers. And Amazon, what do they originally sell? Books. Very good. Now you can buy everything. Also, expanding on that, what type of economic integration is Amazon now trying to achieve? We talked about this with the robber barons. There's this type and there's that type. Not vertical. What is vertical integration? You're eliminating what? If you have everything from here to here, you're eliminating what? Nobody? If in vertical integration, you have everything from production all the way down to distribution, what are you eliminating in the middle? Yes, very good. You're eliminating all the other middlemen, right? You don't have to deal. How many of you all have seen an Amazon van or truck recently? They're weird. Yeah. Did you see those 5 years ago? No. Or maybe two. I don't think I was 5. But you sure I know. All right. Telecommuting for work and school, working and learning from home, which we've all done. Distance learning. Believe it or not, the first distance learning classes were done via radio and television. Now it's done via internet. growth of white-collar careers, greater access to collegiate-level courses, a growing middle class, and greater access to personal computers. I don't have a personal love for any of these companies, but I want to ask you, can anyone out there raise their hand if they have absolutely nothing to do with all of these companies? Impossible, right? Everybody's tied to at least one of them, whether we like it or not. All of them would not be possible without advancements in technology. All right. Nixon in the 70s. So, Nixon, as we already know, won the election of 1968. Remember, he defeated Humphrey and George Wallace. Comes in, he's not as, they're talking about a return to conservatism and representing the silent majority, but he doesn't really do away on the domestic front with the LBJ Great Society programs. He is trying to figure out a way to end the war in Vietnam, but remember, there had already been an attempt to bring the war to an end in 68. He will attempt to bring the war to an end in 71, but to no avail. His plan for Vietnamization or Vietnamization is not going to work out because even though they hand the war over to the South Vietnamese with the help of the French, the bombing raids continue and they spill over into Laos and Cambodia. Also on the international front, he's trying to exploit that rivalry that has popped up between China and the Soviets. So he'll be the first American president to visit China and will negotiate reopening trade with China. He's also he won't be the first president, but he'll go on to visit the Soviet Union. He improves relations with the Soviet Premier Brezhnev. Khrushchev's out of the picture now. Gorbachev's not on the scene yet. So these are like some of the positive things that Nixon does in terms of international affairs, but Nixon was super paranoid, and he had a list of enemies, and he constantly thought that if he had something on his political enemies and he had something on the Democrats, he would always be able to have the upper hand and be able to extort them. So, this is when things get a little wild in 1974. In June, 1972, 74 is when he resigns. In June of 72, a group of former FBI and CIA operatives break into the Democratic National Committee's offices in the Watergate Hotel. When they break in, their goal is to take documentation to expose and potentially blackmail members of the Democratic Party, but they're also trying to plug the phones and put in listening devices. However, security guards discover them, they're arrested, and this thing ultimately leaks to the press. Nixon tries to stay out of this, saying that he has nothing to do with it, but then they find out, as informants start letting the press know, that Nixon is in fact involved, and he, without the consent of anyone, has been wiretapping the Oval Office. So they asked for the tapes to be handed over. They are, but the tapes were doctored. Now, two major news outlets are going to have leaked information: the Washington Post and the New York Times. And when this thing starts to spiral, Nixon has a lot of questions to answer, and he's been violating the Constitution. This is an overreach in the executive branch. So rather than being impeached, Nixon will be the first president in U.S. history to resign on August 9th, 1974. He'll famously say, I'm not a crook. I earned everything I ever got. But it puts the country in a really awkward spot because there is another problem that's happening in the country right now. We're about to roll into an economic crisis, and Nixon's a part of that. So I'm going to talk about that as we move into the Ford administration. Any questions about Watergate up to this point? So this is Nixon after his resignation due to the Watergate scandal, about to board Marine One on August 9th, 1974. So let's talk a little bit about Gerald Ford and post-Watergate, all right? Well, Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, also resigned, making Gerald Ford Nixon's vice president. Well, when Nixon resigns, now one of the most unlikely characters in American history, Gerald Ford, at least modern American history, ends up becoming the U.S. president. Within a month, Ford will pardon Nixon, which means he can't be prosecuted federally. Well, that leads to widespread criticism, all right? Also, just a couple of months, or just a few months, not a few, but let's see. Eight months after he goes into office, what's going to happen in Vietnam? What happens in Vietnam? Nobody? Nothing? April 1975? Pardon? Well, bigger than that. What's that? No.
Oh, they fell to communism?
Thank you. They fall to communism. North Vietnam takes control of South Vietnam and Saigon falls. That happens in Ford's, that falls into his lap, okay? Also, on the domestic front, the economy, right? In 1971, Nixon takes the U.S. off the gold standard. And America experienced for the first time an export trade deficit. Econ students, what does an export trade deficit mean? Anybody know? Very good. We are having more come in than we are putting out. Okay? More goods are coming in, less is rolling out. What will this do to inflation? It rises. All right? This gets crazy as the 70s wear on. By the end of the 1970s, does anybody want to give me a guess on what the interest rate on a home loan looked like? 17. Is that not insane? That's like the interest rate on a credit card. That was the interest rates on home loans because of this era. This is where wages go flat for like 20 years. And something that was very bizarre that the country was not ready for was that both inflation and unemployment were rising in the 70s. Another big part of this is who is retiring? What age group of people are retiring in the 70s, in the 1970s? Very good. Does anybody know what we call the World War II people? What their generation's called? No, that's before them. The greatest generation. Very good. Excellent job. Guys, I want you to hang in here with me because this is important. The greatest generation is retiring. What are they about to collect upon retirement? Pensions? Very good. You all got that faster than anybody. What else? Social Security. And what are they going to cash out? Got it right now. War bonds. Remember I told you in World War II, we're going to come back to the war bonds? Here we are. Are you going to tell these World War II vets, oh, sorry, we're not going to pay you your pension. Oh, sorry, we're not going to pay you Social Security. Oh, sorry, your war bonds are no good. Absolutely not. Because nothing would exist had they not won World War II. Do you see the situation here? It's tricky. It's a really tricky thing. And what a lot of companies start to do, they start here in the late 70s, heading into the early 80s, what will American business start to do with their jobs? Anyone? Nobody? Well, a lot of unions do. But what will the companies do with their jobs to try to cut costs? Yes, that happens. You start moving their jobs overseas, right? Do y'all know what that's called? It's called offshoring.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Like I know.
And outsourcing.
Outsource. That's the one I was like,
Offshoring and outsourcing. That happens at the end of the 70s. Ask your grandparents about the 70s. This might pop up. Okay? The economic woes. So Ford does not have a shot at re-election. He will run, but it's not going to work out. I do feel like we need to give Ford a little bit of love, though, because I feel like I've really kicked him around. Ford was a real big conservationist. What you guys need to understand is that, guys, the Republicans and the Democrats, please hang in here with me. Thank you. The Republicans and the Democrats were complicated. There were conservative, racist, Southern Democrats. Okay? There were moderate, pro-civil rights Democrats. There were radical, left-leaning Democrats. There were conservative Republicans. There were moderate Republicans. There were even socially liberal, conservative, fiscally conservative Republicans in the 70s. It is a really odd time. We don't start to see like the circling of wagons around platforms until we get into the 80s and 90s. And we'll talk about that a bit later. So, Earth Day and the EPA. Earth Day is celebrated in the 70s. We still celebrate it. A big push against pollution. Are y'all familiar with Silent Spring by Rachel Carson? Your grandparents, when they were kids, playing hopscotch and riding their bikes and whatnot, people would like a truck would ride into neighborhoods and just spray pesticides everywhere. And it was killing the environment and making people sick. The EPA was started during the Nixon administration in the 1970s to establish federal regulations to protect the American public. Ford picks up the torch on this, keeps the conservation going. If you ever go out to Colorado, there's a whole lot named in honor of Ford because he did a lot for conservation out there. One big push was for rivers to be improved, cleaner. Who feels like the James River is kind of funky? It was way worse in this era. It's gotten much better. We still have room to improve, right? Also the Lower Jackson, which feeds into the James. It's gotten better, but there's always room for improvement. This is the birth of the Green Revolution, which was heavily impacted my youth. Like, I grew up with cartoon characters that you probably never heard of. The Toxic Avenger against toxic waste pollution. Captain Planet. I'm not kidding. Look these people up. It's pretty nuts. These are like cartoons and comic book characters trying to get Gen X behind the effort to clean up the environment. Arbor Day. When I was a kid, Arbor Day rolled around, people were like handing out saplings. I mean, it was nuts. Come on, plan sanitation. Wow. All right. Also, regulations on wastewater, regulations on toxic waste dumps. 79 was real bad because we had our own little mini Chernobyl 3 Mile Island meltdown. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that in PA. So that was pretty tricky. We're like on the cusp of pushing for climate change. That becomes a real big effort after in the 80s we discovered a hole in the ozone layer. That was very, very rough. It was a big part of the push. Did you guys just look up Captain Planet? All right. Earth, wind, water, fire, water. All right. Carter in the late 70s. Carter will win the presidential election of 1976. Naval Academy grad, moderate Dem. On the domestic front, he wants to improve the economy, but believe it or not, he does quite a bit of cutting in the federal budget. But on the international front, there's widespread fear with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. There's rising tension in the Middle East, which will lead Carter to step in and broker what is called the Camp David Accords, which was a short-lived peace between Egypt and Israel. That actually creates more tension in the region, and it will ultimately lead to what is called the Iranian hostage crisis, where 52 hostages from the U.S. Embassy were held hostage for a year. Anyone ever seen the film Argo before? Recommend it. Carter also had kind of a tricky situation. He was super meticulous, bit of a micromanager, but this is a guy that was deeply religious. And what two significant eras had Carter lived through?
Korean War, Vietnam.
Even before that. And before that?
Depression.
Very good. Carter lived through the Depression. And he lived through World War II, in Korea, and Vietnam, and all these things. And the economy's struggling. And Carter has a speech that he gives to the country to basically like, hey, tighten your belts, right? Suck it up. Do more with less. How do you think that went over? Not good. The American public doesn't want to be told by the president, stop consumerism, right? Or do more with less. So it really kind of backfired on him. But the thing that really hurt Carter is the economy, because the economy just didn't improve. And Reagan comes in, he's a former actor, they call him the great communicator. Reagan's going to make a lot of promises he just never carries out or follows through with, but he's saying all the right things. Reagan's like, I'm going to be tough on communism. Check. I'm going to cut taxes. Check. I'm going to cut the federal budget. Check. These were things that Carter could not compete with. So in the election of 1980, Reagan is going to win in a landslide. But let's give Carter a little credit where credit's due. Carter has an amazing post-presidential legacy. He goes on to found Habitat for Humanity. He pushes for humanitarian aid globally. He personally goes and rescues political prisoners in places like North Korea. The guy worked until he couldn't work anymore. And he just recently passed away not long ago. He sets the tone for how a president should operate after their presidency. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't give up your civil service because it's done. It's not a position for celebrity, it's a position for service. That's what Carter, that is his greatest legacy. So I do feel like we got to give our peanut farmer from Georgia a little bit of credit here. If you look at the ledger on what he did as president versus what he did after, it's kind of mind-boggling to think of how hard he worked for the greater good of not only the U.S., but the greater good of the world in his post presidential years. Noteworthy events of the 70s. The nation celebrated its 200th birthday, the bicentennial, July 4th, 1776. In 76, Steve Jobs launched the first Apple computer with Wozniak. Violent crime and illegal drug use were on the rise. This is the beginning of the cocaine and later crack epidemic that will spread in American urban areas. Supreme Court legalized abortion, and the groundbreaking case Roe v. Wade, hotly debated and not too long ago overturned in the 2022 Dobbs case. New genre of music born, hip-hop, rap, and of course disco, which didn't make it. Hip-hop and rap certainly did. We'll talk more about music as we move into the 80s and 90s. Son of Sam murders, psych students. You guys talk about Berkowitz yet?
Yeah.
Son of Sam murders. Also John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah.
That's also in the 70s. Yes, that's the plot. Horrible. So, this is not just a weird time for serial killers in the 70s, it's also a weird time for cults. And the most famous and the most tragic event involving a cult in the 70s is the People's Temple, the Jonestown Massacre in Guyana, where they drank cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. That's why we say don't drink the Kool-Aid. Star Wars, where my Star Wars fans at? NA, released in 77 by George Lucas. Panama Canal Treaty, signed by Carter to hand the Panama Canal back to Panama in 1999. Sony Walkman, this is your personal listening device on the go. That was a huge deal because then we'll have a Discman, MP3, the iPod, and our phones, right? We're music lovers. So that's a little bit about the 70s. Problems in the Middle East in this era. Israel, safe haven for Jews, was established in 1948 after World War II. The Israeli and Palestinian tensions, religious and cultural, were high from the 1950s to present. Obviously, most recent war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza started on October 7th, 2023. Egypt, along with Syria, waged war against Israel in 1973. This is what led Carter to broker the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt in 1978. That peace did not last very long. Jordan and Lebanon claimed that their land had been stolen by Israel. Saudi Arabia fell in league with other Arab nations in 1973 to raise oil prices, which led to OPEC. And during the Ford and Carter administration, there was a huge crisis, oil and petroleum crisis. Have your grandparents ever talked about the rationing of gasoline, where they could only get gas on certain days, and people were like fist fighting at the gas pump and like pulling guns on each other? It was really crazy. That move ultimately leads to the rise of Al Qaeda, because what will occur in the Muslim Brotherhood that was founded after World War II, that group splinters, and then there's a very wealthy and dedicated Saudi that gets in the mix, and his name is, anyone know? Osama
Bin Laden.
bin Laden. Osama bin Laden comes on the scene, okay? Islamic fundamentalists seized control of Iran in 79. They took 52 American hostages from the U.S. Embassy. Those hostages were not released until after Carter left office. Before I get to attacks, Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, involving America in a full-scale war in the Middle East. It was a UN operation similar to What War? What War was previously a UN operation that we learned about that America was involved in. Anybody? What war did we get involved in after World War II that was a UN operation that we got sucked into? Korea. Korea was a UN action. So was the war in Desert Storm, the war in Kuwait. That was the Persian Gulf. That was a UN action. Attacks will follow. Terrorist attacks. World Trade Center in 1993. The USS Cole will be attacked by Al Qaeda in 2000. And then, of course, the World Trade Center attack on 9/11 2001. Highly recommended book and series, The Looming Tower. Well worth your time. It won the Pulitzer in 2003. If you want to know from how it all started all the way through 9/11, that's the book to read. Okay, the presidential election of Reagan. As I said before, Reagan, he is running on a campaign promise of a return to conservatism. He's calling it a conservative revolution. We often refer to this as the Reagan Revolution. He's promising to cut taxes, cut government programs and spending, shrink the government, be tough on communism, force the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's got a lot of grandiose plans. Wage a war on drugs. A lot of things a lot of people wanted to hear. Hey, how are you? Great, good seeing you. All right. So, Reagan will win in a landslide. He is going to defeat Jimmy Carter in his first election in 80. And then in 84, he defeats Walter Mondale. Reagan is like a tinge complicated, right? Here's why. Reagan is going to do a lot of what he says he's going to do. But then a lot of it he doesn't really carry out or do. It's really funny because a lot of people think that he totally gutted the government and government spending. The cuts were only about 30%. It was far less than what his intention was. Also, guys, help me out here. What does he not cut? No, he guts taxes. He doesn't cut Social Security. And you are right, he doesn't really cut much spending. Social Security remains, Medicare, Medicaid, the arms race, the space race, all that continues. All right? So Reagan's economic plan is complicated. Reaganomics. Here's the premise of Reaganomics. Cut taxes for corporations. Cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans. Cut taxes from top to bottom. All right? But also cut government spending. Because, as we've already learned, at this period of time, we are dealing with a deficit. Yeah? But what Reagan will do is improve consumer confidence. So, people are spending money. The market is growing, right? But here's the thing, guys. Wages remain flat. And like you said, spending, it didn't cut like everybody thought it would be. So what we're about to go through is an even larger deficit that was very predictable. But a lot of people just kind of wanted to put their heads in the sand because the market's roaring, everybody's feeling good, Wall Street's popping off, life is good, but it depends on where you were on this triangle. If you're up here, Reaganomics is awesome, right? The idea of supply side economics, Reaganomics is this. And I'd love for you to look at the pyramid. If we majorly cut taxes up here, then all that money will trickle back down. Guys, the rich don't get rich by spending all their money. What most people are going to end up doing up here with these tax cuts is doing what with that money? What do people with a lot of money tend to do to make more money? Invest, right? So the market is roaring, it's rolling, but the money's not trickling down to the bottom. I will say the middle class does grow. And it's funny too, like if you get people's opinion that live through this, they'll, whether Reaganomics worked for them or not, if they're up here, oh man, Reaganomics was awesome. If they're in the middle, it might have been okay. But if they're down here, massive tax cuts for the poor with flat wages, it's not really hopeful. You know what I'm saying? So what's also mounting is this deficit, right? You can't keep spending and also cut taxes simultaneously. And that's what's going on here. Questions about Reaganomics? Okay. Here's a big part of the deficit. SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. What this is all about is increased amount of government spending for defense. Some of it's real, some of it's fake. What's real is our satellite technology improves. What's fake is we don't have satellites that have lasers that can fire down missiles from space. We don't have that. The Soviets think we do. And it does lead to something very positive. It leads to Reagan and Gorbachev signing the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in '87. This is where the Soviet Union is starting to, it's not the beginning of the end. The beginning of the end was Chernobyl. But now, things are moving in the right direction, right? But SDI is complicated. We are all benefactors of technology that grew out of SDI. But there's going to be a cost. And that cost, we've got a massive deficit. And the debt is rising as a result of the spending. This is a review from the Cold War. Collapse of the Soviet Union. Increasing Soviet military expenses to compete with the United States. Arms race and space race. Rising nationalism in the Soviet republics. Fast-paced reforms, the market economy, economic inefficiency. The estimated cost of Chernobyl, $235 billion over 30 years. Glasnost and Perestroika, introduced by Gorbachev. The Berlin Wall speech by Reagan. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And then, of course, increased military and economic pressure through SDI. This is where we wrap up today. Noteworthy events of the 80s. Failed rescue attempt of hostages in Tehran. John Lennon was shot and killed in Central Park. Mount St. Helens erupted. That was a big one. Pac-Man and the Rubik's Cube became popular. Ted Turner launched CNN. Anybody ever seen Miracle on Ice? Yeah. The Olympic hockey team defeated the Soviets. 81, assassination attempt on Reagan. First woman appointed to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. Yeah, I should have added that. Did you say Rocky?
I said hockey.
Hockey. I think you said Rocky. Should have added Rocky. Sadly, the AIDS epidemic unfolds in this era, and the Reagan administration pays little to no attention because it overwhelmingly impacted the homosexual community. But here's the problem. Because they ignore it, why does it become a larger problem for the country and the world? Well, they're struggling to find a cure, and the government's doing little to support the CDC in finding a cure. Besides the fact of not acknowledging the loss of life, regardless of the lifestyle of the people, there's another alarming result, and I'm going to give you a hint. Arthur Ashe. Why does Arthur Ashe die of AIDS?
Because of surgeries and like blood contamination.
Good.
Blood transfusion.
Thank you. Blood transfusions.
Wasn't he a tennis player?
Yes, from Richmond. Guys, contaminated blood got into the blood bank supply in the country. It was, guys, I lived through this. It was freaky. It was scary. And it does not get acknowledged and dealt with until the 90s. All right, so PCs introduced by IBM. MTV aired. All right, here we go. What is the first song that's music video aired on MTV? It's a good piece of pop culture trivia.
What year? You know the answer?
I do know the answer, but I forget the name of the band. 1981.
I know the song. Isn't it like? Oh my god, my dad don't know this.
It's not the greatest song.
Oh, it's
Good guess. No.
isn't it like the song "Video Killed the Radio Star"?
Very good. Who's the artist?
Like the vocals.
All right. Nice. The Bugles. Is it?
My dad says it on these.
Perfect. I forgot the artist. That's the first video. E.T. was released. Guys, my first film in the theater, E.T. It's an awesome time. Michael Jackson released Thriller. This was a really big deal for me. Somewhere in my mother's basement are VHS videos of me performing Thriller for the family. Not just Thriller, the entire album. I held everyone hostage to perform. Vietnam War Memorial opened in '82. The Cabbage Patch Kids craze. Parents were legit fist fighting in toy stores over Cabbage Patch Kids.
Give me nightmares. No, my grandma has the creepiest one standing, like my child, my grandma's there, and
That's
her head
hilarious.
is staring at me every night.
Ask your grandmother if she fought for it.
I highly doubt it. She's getting a Cabbage Patch Kid for my mom.
It's hilarious.
I highly doubt she'd fight for it.
Reagan announced SDI, Star Wars. Sally Ride, guys, important, right? Sally Ride, first American woman in space. U.S. embassy bombed in Beirut. Hole found in the ozone layer in '85. Gorbachev called for glasnost and perestroika. New Coke hits the market. It wasn't good. I had to go back to the original formula. Also, Pepsi introduced Crystal Pepsi. It was not good either. The Titanic was found. That was like the biggest deal. That was like so cool. Wow, the submarine outfit. Pretty traumatizing moment in my youth. Me and my friends at school gathered around the television, like all children in America, to watch the Challenger shuttle, and it exploded. There's a teacher on board. Chernobyl, nuclear meltdown. Highly recommend the Chernobyl series this summer for you guys on HBO. Iran-Contra, super awkward Reagan scandal that he claimed not to be a part of. The government secretly and illegally sold arms to Iran, like missiles, and funneled the money to Nicaraguan rebels. Awkward. Oliver North was wrapped up in that scandal. USSR launched the Mir space station in '86. DNA was first used to convict criminals in '87. And then the stock market crash, Black Monday in '87. This had been the worst drop since the Depression. And then, obviously, we've lived through quite a few, haven't we? Pan American Flight 103 was bombed by Libyan nationalists. This was an awkward moment. The U.S. accidentally shot down an Iranian airliner with civilians in '88. Nintendo, where my gamers at, Nintendo was introduced. They're going to totally overtake what gaming system?
The arcade.
I'm glad you said that. Arcades aren't totally out of the picture yet. They will eventually be pushed out. Does anybody know what the original home console was that was affordable? Not yet.
Yes.
Not yet. Not yet.
My dad had it.
I know it starts with an A.
Yeah. Atari. Very good. It's Atari. Atari, then Nintendo, then Sega comes on the scene. There is a company in the middle there that was a mainly arcade group. They're called Neo Geo. It didn't work out. They were way too expensive. And then Sega Genesis. Wow. Anyway, then PlayStation.
Guys,
Yeah.
just want to play some pinball.
So, all right. Berlin Wall falls in '89. Exxon Valdez oil spill. Horrible ecological disaster in Alaska. And student protesters killed in Tiananmen Square in 1989 in China. Yeah.
Who was I forgot his name. Who's the guy who performed on the Berlin Wall from Baywatch?
Oh, David Hasselhoff.
Yeah.
Oh, Hasselhoff. They loved him in Germany.
No,
Yeah.
he's really bad.
Top left, Sally Ride. Top center, the Cold Wars, the new code recipe. Top right, Sandra Day O'Connor. Good job. Bottom left,
I went through it yesterday.
Michael Jackson. And then the bottom right, the Vietnam War Memorial. That, ladies and gents, is all I've got today. Yes.